much for HR Recruit hosting this webinar, and it's great to see so much interest in progressing diversity and inclusion in our organisations. Quick intro about me. I've worked in HR for an awful long time. In fact, it's been that long that when I got my first tax rebate, it was paid to my husband at the time because a wife's income was classed as her husband's. How times have changed. I've worked in large and small organisations across a number of sectors, environments and countries. And I first started getting involved with dignity and respect at work and the inclusion agenda back in 2005. And since that time, my interest and experience in the subject's grown. Let me tell you a bit about Vista. We provide employment law and employee relations training and investigations and HR services to our clients. And we have this written on our office wall. We aspire to be a great place to work. The metaphorical sofa is comfy, is the really important bit, and that's for everyone to feel included and comfortable. Or do they? Inclusion and diversity is bigger than the legal context of the Equality Act or the 9 protected characteristics. And so just because we at Vista work with employment legislation, inclusion and diversity isn't just a given. And we didn't begin our journey with a D&I label. For us, it started out with dignity and respect and attracting the best people and enabling them to feel comfortable so that they can do their best work. Now, I'm not a fan, personally, of quotas. I think they often drive the wrong behaviours and they can't take the place of a strong, holistic approach to inclusion. So if you set a target and then you start to miss it, how does that get perceived by the workforce? And having quotas can sometimes undermine achievements if people, perceive that there's some kind of tokenism. So we wanted to make sure that we made use of a framework that would enable us to approach inclusion and diversity in a way which worked for us and invited a critical eye to look at the impact that we were having. And we started by being the first private sector organisation to achieve the British Standard for Diversity and Inclusion when it was launched in 2017. And the standards framework was focused on the 4 facets of organisational relationships, and that's been the internal relationships, the relationships with customers, with suppliers, and with communities. And we liked the simple and straightforward approach, and that the standard was suitable for both large and small organisations and in any sector. And then in 2021, the ISO International Standard for Diversity and Inclusion was launched, and the original British standard is going to be phased out next year. And we were very proud to be the first organisation in the world, as my chairman keeps saying, to achieve it. Now, ISO has a bit of a reputation. Most people will roll their eyes and think about checklists whenever it's mentioned. But the good news is that this ISO builds on the framework of the British Standard, so it's using the same organisational facets. And the main difference is that the ISO has got a heavier focus on governance and on measurement and the outcomes, but it remains flexible for all sizes and sectors of organisations and avoids that rigid checkbox approach, which is often the experience with other ISO standards. So what does it look like? So it starts off with, there's a fundamental, 6 fundamental D&I prerequisites, and that is around recognising diversity, governing effectively, acting accountably, working inclusively, communicating inclusively, and advocating and championing D&I. So that's the basis. But then it wants to look at the actions that you're taking, the measures that you're putting into place, and the outcomes that are being achieved. So this is about you having in place the accountabilities and the responsibilities in the organisation, having a diversity and inclusion framework, what you're doing about an inclusive culture, your human resource management life cycle, the products and services that you have, and the procurement and supply chain relationships that are in place, and what you do in relation to your external stakeholder relationships. So as you can see, it's a very practical structure, and positioning it in this way gives it a real organisational focus. And the standard also looks more closely at the relationship life cycle and the practical application of the actions and the measures and the outcomes to ensure that diversity and inclusion is woven into the fabric of what you do. Now, the assessment itself is in 3 different stages. The first stage is where you gather and submit documented evidence to the assessor. And the assessor then checks whether you appear to have a good basis on which to be assessed. The assessor then arranges to meet with the leaders and the managers and the employees in the organisation because they need to verify the documented evidence and also gather further information. And then a report is produced which contains the assessor's recommendations, both to the organisation and to the panel that the report is submitted to for final approval. In all, that process took around about 6 weeks. Was it worth it? Yeah, definitely. We found the standard straightforward to use and a great way of challenging ourselves to making sure we were aligning everything that we do. And it was also a great recognition for our teams because it's the organisation as a whole that lives and breathes inclusion and diversity. And we found that having the ISO standard has given us increased credibility with clients and with candidates who want to work for organisations whose values are aligned with theirs. Tender processes now often include questions about an organisation's commitment to D&I, and having the standard has made it very easy for us to demonstrate that. But most importantly, the standard encourages ongoing improvement. It's not just a one-off where you get a certificate and you hang it on a wall. This is about there's going to be ongoing assessment of us continuing to build on what we've already achieved. But I also wanted to take the opportunity today to look forwards to when we get beyond thinking about the traditional characteristics when we think about inclusion. Society is getting more culturally pluralistic. And if you just focus on underrepresented groups, it can come across that there's a problem about them rather than there being an organisational imperative to be inclusive and diverse. So I firmly believe that true inclusion is what leads to diversity. And the future is going to be about diversity of experience. So what might that mean and what might it look like? So if we start with a diversity of emotional intelligence, people and organisations are going to become more socially aware and thoughtful and empathetic. And employers are going to need to reflect those changes in society to engage with the workforce. Then there will be diversity of lived experience rather than focusing on traditional markers of diversity such as age, race, or gender. This is going to be about recognising what sits behind the labels and recognising everyone's unique lived experience, such as their upbringing, their cultural exposure, even trauma, personal beliefs and values, and all the other experiences that shape a person. And employment practices are going to need to accommodate these very diverse experiences and expectations. There'll also be generational diversity to account for. The future workforce is going to have 4 generations, and the expectations of either end of those spectrums can be extreme. And bridging those gaps is going to be key for employers to take advantage of mixing the traits of those groups to enable better problem solving, which is going to lead to products and services that are going to be more considered. We also need a balance and diversity of risk appetite in an organisation. Innovative organisations are going to need teams that have got a mix of risk appetite to anchor the right practices to make sure that risk is taken strategically. And then there's diversity of mental needs. Humans have three basic psychological needs: autonomy, which is having control over their lives and decision making; competence, where their effectiveness in dealing with their circumstances and their environment; and relatedness, that need for meaningful relationships and connection to others. But everyone needs each of these things to different degrees, and recognizing this at an individual level and then enabling teams could increase the capacity of everyone to do their jobs. Then we need to have a think about imagination. Tackling problems from multiple perspectives is where innovation thrives. This isn't about creativity as such. Imagination is innate, but individual foundations of thought are different. And it's the combination of the different imaginings that's going to lead to innovative results. And finally, learnability. This is going to be one of the most important future skill and markers of diverse talent. Organisations will need to foster a mindset of sharing knowledge and experience to create the ability to constantly adapt, upskill and reskill each time change comes along. So if diversity means something different in the future, this is where it's going to get tricky, because we're used to our KPIs to progress where we are and progress that we've made. And measuring diversity of experience will not come from tests or assessments. It's going to be about having conversations with individuals to understand their level of competence within each of these future markers. So how do they perceive their own and others' emotions? What personal challenges have they faced? What cultures have they been exposed to? What are their values? What generation do they belong to? And do they fit into those generational stereotypes? How do they perceive risk? And how comfortable are they with risk taking? And what are their psychological needs? What are their strengths and weaknesses psychologically? Do they require more or less autonomy, connection, or competence? And what examples are there of their input to innovative projects? And how well do they collaborate with each other? And how have they adapted their capacity for learning? So what should we be doing? Now, some people like this and others won't, but I'm going to use an analogy of cooking and recipes. Because you need to know what recipe you want to make. You've got to have that vision and know where you're going and then put a plan in place to get you there. A great recipe needs a great chef who believes in what they're making and trusts in the ingredients that they're using and is committed to making the best dish possible. So processes must be modified to embed the right behaviours and accountability in the organisation, transforming diversity as a checklist to diversity as a business driver. Then you need to do the necessary prep work, understand the levers that are going to enable you to use diversity as a competitive advantage and a driver of business results. So do a thorough and honest assessment of the current situation to learn exactly what's working and what isn't. And once you've determined the gaps, give employees the practical tools they need to excel during what is a time of transition, and create short-term wins wherever you can. You need to enable and empower teams, and by listening to their concerns and giving them exactly what they need. In other words, just be a good chef and make sure that your kitchen has got all the equipment it needs to effectively execute the right recipe for diversity. And then you need to bake inclusion into your culture. You need to build and implement programs and interventions that are going to turn diversity and inclusion into a way of living, a way of thinking, and a way of doing business. For diversity to have any meaningful impact on employees and for it to improve productivity, creativity, and accountability and contribute to the overall success of the business, it's got to be part of the very DNA of the business. But this isn't just going to happen overnight. It's going to take incredible commitment from the top leadership, who've got to be willing to set the example and hold themselves accountable. And it also takes concrete, practical programs that enable teams to embrace and integrate diversity into their best practices. So you've got to mix all those ingredients well and then bake that mixture until it flavours the whole culture. And then you need to let it set and taste it and tweak it and taste it again to measure that effectiveness and monitor the progress that you're making over time. And of course, make any changes that you need to. And then celebrate your wins and challenge yourself to keep the momentum going. And you've got to expect this major transition to take time. You're changing the hearts and minds of a diverse group of people. And the success depends on their willingness to embrace and act on it. So force feeding it is only going to backfire. So instead, make sure that you offer incentives and tools that make sense to your teams and enable your people to flourish in an inclusive environment. That doesn't mean we just leave it alone to gel. We still have to keep stirring the pot and having a taste and adjusting the seasoning. One of the biggest mistakes organisations make is starting off really strong and then failing to keep the focus, which should always be a work in progress. So the final message really from me is that you've got to be authentic. If you're not, then people will know it. They can smell it. Don't promise stuff that isn't going to happen. It's better to be realistic about your plans and take it at the pace that works for you. But at the same time, be optimistic. You can probably achieve a lot more than you think right now. And don't keep waiting for the right time or until you can do it more perfectly. Just get on with it. I'll let you read this for a moment. This quote from Barack Obama sums up that even if you feel that you're a million miles away from where you want to be, the fact that you are taking steps towards it will be making a difference along the way. So I'll just finish up by mentioning that Joe's going to be sending out a follow-up to you with details of how you can access some free policy templates and some time-limited free access to Dignity at Work training videos. I've also provided my contact details on the slide, so if you want to get in touch and have a chat, then feel free. And finally, just thanks so much for your time today, and I hope you found it useful.